Hi, everybody. I'm LoriKim Alexander. I am co-director of an organization called BlackCuse Pride, where we hold space for queer and trans people of color in the city of Syracuse. Um, we hold space for queer, trans only spaces for Black, Brown, Indigenous, and POC folks. And I have been a vegan 25 years, and I'm a biologist. I do food justice work, and I just really am excited to be here talking with you all today. And I didn't really know what to call my talk because I think this should be a conversation among Black and Brown people. We need to be in conversation in order to create our spaces in ways that fulfill the needs of our movements and ourselves. So let me just begin by saying this. Don't include me. Don't include us. We've been here in all movement spaces and in all the creation of movement philosophies. We've been here. Whether you like it or not, or whether you've been able to reconcile this with your idea of what our liberation movements should look like, or the history you've been mistold, we've been here. So, speaking about including trans and queer, Black and Brown people in vegan movement spaces is a pretty insulting joke. But let's just step back a bit and look at our liberation movements in a more holistic way. Movement work is the ways in which we push back and through the colonization of Earth and its being. The name itself means action and implies fluidity. Let's think about liberation movements, the movements that work against the oppression of marginalized bodies, as we think of biodiversity. Biodiversity is not the whole collection of beings on Earth going about their daily business with no thought for any other species around them. What makes the ecosystems which sustain us work are the symbiotic and mutualistic, that's mutually beneficial relationships and networks of connection which run deep and are inextricably linked. These relationships are vital to the survival of the individuals within them. When we remove one tiny piece of this framework, we herald the collapse of systems. As each system breaks down, the entire earth begins to crumble. For instance, gopher tortoises are long-lived burrowing reptiles found in the southeastern United States. They can burrow down up to roughly 50 feet. They spend most of their lives in these burrows, and their burrows are key habitat for over 350 species. The gopher tortoise is currently on the endangered species list and threatened with extinction because of habitat loss. Many of the species of snakes, insects, frogs, birds like burrowing owls that use these gopher tortoise burrows are either threatened or critically endangered as well. So gopher tortoises are very territorial. So how is it that they can allow these animals into their spaces? These are mutually beneficial relationships. So the animals find shelter and help protect gopher tortoises, who are vegan as well, by the way. Thinking about spaces that claim to be focused on liberation, we see that none of the systems of oppression are disconnected. They all stem from the racist capitalist patriarchy that has been spawned by colonialism. So, how is it that we expect that liberation will come without a clear and consistent centering of the most marginalized and affected by these systems across species? True anti oppression work is abolition work. In our movement for Black lives, we have pledged to center the most marginalized Black people. But are we forgetting the Black people who have lost limbs and lives in the slaughterhouses, chicken farms, and other extensions of these state sanctioned carceral systems? We have never thought about the ways in which we are wholly marginalized, yet a global majority, how we contribute to the marginalization and subjugation of other beings and are also oppressed by this. Queer liberation spaces, unless they are specifically created by people of color, have historically faltered in centering Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, and have also never thought to expand their notion of what marginalized bodies means to include non-human animals, not in any larger sense. If we include veganism, it's really a dietary restriction for the humans in these spaces, not as a point of practice or a liberatory tool. In vegan spaces, we often claim to center non-human species. Centering animals really means decentering ourselves without losing ourselves in the process. So here's what is probably an unpopular opinion. We are routinely centering animals by anthropomorphizing them. This means we are using human models for the emotions, actions, and intentions of non-human animals. We do not know how to center them without first looking to ourselves as the model. That needs work. This work will mean detaching ourselves from our misconceptions that cloud our understanding. And family, we are cloudy. We have been made so by hundreds of years of misconceptions that have seeped in so deep that rooting them out feels like ripping out an organ. It was never ours though, fam. So when we work to center trans and queer, Black, Indigenous, and people of color within the liberatory practice of veganism, this cannot be done without the input of trans and queer, Black, Indigenous, and people of color folks. In fact, it has to be done by trans and queer, Black, Indigenous, and people of color folks. So consequently, I am telling you, Black vegans, you vegans of color, and you white vegans who now own the mainstream, don't come to us and say you want to be inclusive, intersectional, and celebrate diversity if you don't come to us first before you create your space. Don't include me. Create the space with us in mind. You follow our lead. Hell, y'all do this and everything else. In fashion, mannerisms, language, liberation, trans and queer, Black and brown people gave you the vanguard. This year marks the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall Uprising in Greenwich Village in Manhattan. The Stonewall was a bar that was created for white gay men. It was a space that routinely excluded any Black and brown folks, especially trans and gender nonconforming folks. But that fateful night at the Stonewall was drag night, so all the folks could get in, some with a little struggle, but we digress. This night was that Ms. Marsha P. Johnson, Rivera, and Stormy DeLaviere had enough of the police pushing them around. They fought back, they fought for their lives, and because of them, the white trans and queer folk were moved to action too. When you look at the photos of the now veterans of that uprising and those who were forward in the early organizations that it birthed, they're mostly white. Very few are Black and brown people remain, and the ones who are still here are rarely mentioned by any larger media outlet or any far-reaching organization. This year, Marcia, Sylvia, and Stormy, our Black and brown ancestors, were invoked so many times by white voices, but the substantive truth of Black and trans queer lives was never included in these sound bites. This is the truth of the occupied reality we live in. We are claimed only in death. The violence of that death is not connected to the structures in place which caused it and perpetuate the privilege of claiming us. Marsha P. Johnson was murdered and found floating in the Hudson. This year, 12 Black trans women were murdered, most by gunshot. And this year, 2 Latinx trans women were murdered by the state. And those are the ones we know of. A true and committed biodiversity of movement, with the most marginalized of us at the center, in the lead, not just fodder for the front lines, but in the lead, can fix the disconnection between sound bites and performance, and give those of us marginalized by the systematic state-sanctioned violence of the prison industrial complex, police, politicized borders, and factory farming. This includes monoculture farms. So give us a true voice, a recognition of the intensely magical connections of our moment, of our network of liberation movement is the only way to survive. We are brought to this pivotal moment in history by the audacity of a perception of superiority. The way forward is not a counter, but a decimation of that perception with the audacity of mindful action. We are driven not by simple compassion, but by compulsion to bring everybody with us. My future then is defiantly queer, defiantly Black, radically vegan, and absolutely will never be made through good intention. Thanks so much for listening.